Hello, listeners, and welcome to today's Cult News. I'm your speaker, Casey, and I have an overview of week 3 in the Lori Vallow triple murder trial. For those of you who haven't been following the case or don't know too much about it, I have done a video giving an overview of events leading up to the trial. A brief summary sounds like this. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell were both married to other people when they first met. After a small window of time where they seemed to have bolstered each other's extremist religious beliefs, both of their spouses died. Charles Vallow, of a gunshot wound supposedly shot in self-defense by Lori Vallow's own brother Alex Cox, and Chad Daybell's wife Tammy Daybell died of asphyxiation, which at first was thought to be from natural causes, but now is being treated otherwise. The death of Charles and Tammy was soon followed by the murders of Lori's two young children, Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow, following soon after with the death of Lori's brother Alex Cox, the person who shot her husband, Charles Vallow. Throughout this string of horrific deaths, a nationwide missing persons campaign was launched by multiple law enforcement agencies to locate the two missing children. Lori Vallow was known to move around a lot, from Arizona to Hawaii and to Rexburg, Idaho. During this missing persons hunt for Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell headed over to Hawaii to get married weeks after their respective partners had both died. It appears that Lori's brother Alex Cox was complicit in these crimes, although it is not clear yet just how. Throughout all of this, Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow had gained a small following of devout believers in their extremist beliefs, and some of those people have testified in week 3 of this triple murder trial, where prosecution is seeking justice for JJ Vallow, Tylee Ryan, and Tammy Daybell. Week 3 began with follower of Vallow and Daybell, Zulema Pastines, continuing to testify on the stand. Pastines gave a bombshell testimony on the Friday of week 2, detailing the belief system with the light and dark scales and the 144,000 people that would be saved by Lori and Chad before the imminent doomsday, which at this time has been and gone. Zulema Pastines continued on the Monday, week 3 of the trial, to connect the dots between Chad's teachings and other people involved in their small group. One wild thing that Zulema Pastines mentioned during her testimony on the stand was that at the time Charles Vallow was shot, who they believed was being possessed by the demon Hepless, according to Chad Daybell, Pastines was in the temple doing some cleansing rituals to draw Hepless out. At that very same time, Alex Cox was at the house shooting Charles Vallow dead, supposedly in self-defense. Zulema mentions how Lori was supposed to be with her that morning in the temple, but she never showed up. She also talked about how she had a vision of Jesus Christ in the temple, but was unable to tell people, or at least unwilling, to explain what that encounter looked like. This is the defense's attempts to discredit her as a reliable witness, I imagine, especially as she went on to say that she doesn't remember the date that she married Lori's brother Alex Cox in Las Vegas one day, at the same time as other Inner Circle members married one another. According to Zulema Pastines, Alex Cox had mentioned to her that he had worries he would be made, quote, the fall guy, and that if something happened to him, there was a big bag of cash hidden in their house. Days later, he was found dead in Zulema Pastines' home on the bathroom floor from cardiovascular-related issues. Now, it is being questioned whether Alex Cox killed himself at Chad's instructions, after an audio file was played in the trial during week 2 of Chad giving Alex Cox a teary blessing, explaining how he would need to give his life after protecting Lori. Many others testified throughout the week, and if you want an in-depth overall of all of the people that showed to give their testimonies, you can check out Nate Eaton of East Idaho News on eastidahonews.com or Nate Eaton on Twitter or his channel on YouTube. Nate Eaton does 1-minute tweet updates live from the courthouse, and at the end of the day does an overall summary with audio from the trial being played. It is excellent reporting and very sensitive towards Tylee Ryan, JJ Vallow and Tammy Daybell. Nate Eaton has been on this case since it broke, and his coverage is comprehensive. Another person that took the stand was a Social Security Administration special investigator who testified to explain how Lori Vallow never informed the SS administration about her marriage to Chad Daybell after Charles's death. Because this is classed as a remarriage, certain payments that Lori was receiving after Charles Vallow's death would have stopped. She also didn't report that her kids were missing, and she continued to receive payments for both the children. Of course, these would have stopped too if she would have declared this information. There was a very technical afternoon during week 3 where different law enforcement agents showed how money was being spent, where it came from, where it went, and on whom. Interestingly, Chad Daybell was flying a lot but not paying for any of his flights. Lori Vallow opened multiple bank accounts and even had Tylee Ryan's monthly payments that she was receiving after her father Joe Ryan's death reverted into her own bank account and was then collecting those payments that was supposed to be for Tylee after the date that Tylee Ryan was believed to have been murdered. Alex Cox, Lori's brother, had a well-paid job that paid a good few $1,000s a month that he seemingly quit one day to move from Arizona to Rexburg, Idaho, and took out a $20,000 or so loan and proceeded to buy over 40 guns with that money. Soon, Lori Vallow's last living child, Colby Ryan, took the stand to testify. It has been reported that when Colby Ryan entered the room, Lori mouthed, "My baby," which is more than a reaction that she has given to almost anything this entire trial. According to reports, Colby did not look at his mother, but she kept her eyes on him the entire time he was on the stand. This included a time when legal teams were having a sidebar with the judge out of the courtroom, leaving Colby alone on the stand with Lori staring at him. Also, interestingly, this was the only day of the week where Lori was not shackled to the floor. At one point, Colby turned his head towards his mother, then shook his head, turning away as if in disgust. When on the stand, Colby was asked to identify the people pictured on the screen. He got teary when naming his brother and sister. A phone call from Colby to Lori in prison was played. It was a very emotional phone call, with Colby asking Lori, how could she do this? And does she think that Jesus Christ is on her side after this? The call is available to listen to online, especially through eastidahonews.com. Another person to take the stand was Lori Vallow's friend from Hawaii, April Raymond. The pair met in 2016, and April talked of how Lori seemed to be a loving and committed mother and wife, but that changed when she met Chad Daybell. Soon, Lori came to the island at one point, saying she was getting a divorce from Charles and that she was done with JJ. She began telling April about how April was one of the chosen people, part of the 144,000, and that she could come and join Lori and co. if she was willing to leave her own children behind. At least that's how April thought it was being implied. More technical talk took place as it came to light that Lori Vallow joined Chad Daybell and his adult children on a trip to Knott's Berry Farm weeks after Tammy's death, and that during the day that Chad Daybell's property was searched for a second time, this time on the land surrounding the house, not just the inside of the property, the very same day that Tylee and JJ were found in shallow graves on Chad Daybell's property, Chad was allegedly sitting in his car making large money transfers on the phone to his bank, putting money into his children's bank accounts, hours before his arrest. Throughout many of these testimonies, people from Chandler, Arizona were called to the stand. Each time this happened, the defense team objected, stating that Lori Vallow was being tried for crimes in Idaho, not Arizona. Judge Boyce explained that a court hearing held in February already went over these issues, and that it was determined that witnesses from Arizona would still be permitted to testify, even though the trial was taking place in Idaho. Each time this was objected, Judge Boyce overruled. There were testimonies relating to the day Charles Vallow was shot, with inconsistencies in the stories. Lori Vallow told law enforcement that Alex Cox was staying over to protect her from Charles that day, as Lori had recently discovered that Charles was having an affair and that she was afraid he would come over to the house. Alex Cox told law enforcement that he was actually staying over because they all had plans to go out the next day. According to Nathan Moffat, a Chandler police detective, who took Cox's statement the day Charles was shot. Moffat also said that Cox told him that Charles had struck him on the back of the head with a baseball bat, but there was only a little bit of blood on the back of Alex's head, which wasn't consistent with being hit by a bat by a big tall guy who used to play baseball. Moffat also said that he could see 2 shots were fired from Alex's gun, one being consistent with Charles being shot whilst lying on the floor. A firefighter from Chandler, Arizona, remarks how he arrived on the scene to assist Charles Vallow and was told that Alex Cox was doing CPR until the ambulance arrived. When the firefighter started compressions, he felt the crunching of ribs and sternum, which usually happens at the beginning of CPR, which led him to believe that Alex Cox had not done CPR on Charles. Also, the firefighter had blood on his gloves, and Alex Cox's hands were clean. A lady called Sydney Schenk took the stand to talk about how she responded to an ad put out by Lori Vallow, who was looking for a long-time babysitter to support JJ, her son with special needs. JJ had autism, and Sydney responded to the ad. Her and Lori began texting, and Sydney went over to babysit JJ. Lori Vallow went to pick up a friend from the airport, and after her one stint of babysitting JJ, she never saw him again. She texted Lori Vallow about booking in dates to babysit, but Lori told her that JJ had gone to stay with grandparents in Louisiana for a month. This would be Larry and Kate Woodcock, a sister and brother-in-law of Charles Vallow, and Charles Vallow being born and raised in Louisiana. A month later, Sydney hadn't heard from Lori, so she messaged again and Lori never replied. Josh Wilson from Kennedy Elementary talked about how JJ was enrolled into Kennedy Elementary on September the 3rd and was unenrolled on September the 24th. That's around 3 weeks or so. The last time he was present at the school was September 20th, 2019. Lori emailed the school on the 24th saying that JJ was going to be enrolled into a special school. And when Wilson offered to electronically transfer JJ's educational records, Lori changed her story, stating that her cousin, who knew how to help children with additional needs, would actually be helping JJ be homeschooled. That email was sent on the 24th, and JJ is believed to have died on the 22nd into the 23rd of September. Wynne Hill, the dean at BYU Idaho, was brought onto the stand to ask if he had any recollection or records for a Tylee Vallow, Tylee Ryan, Tylee Cox, and lots of different combinations of Tylee's name enrolled into the school. It was quickly established that despite Lori telling multiple people that Tammy was at BYU doing her studies, they had never had anybody with that name enrolled into the university. David Warwick, Melanie Gibbs' husband, was one of the last people to see JJ alive. His wife, Melanie Gibb, had already given her statement earlier in week 2, and David Warwick took the stand this week to talk about his interactions with Lori and Chad, who spoke to him about visions, and also encouraged him to try and buy some neighbouring land close to Chad's. This made me feel like perhaps Chad was trying to encourage somebody else to buy land close to him so that he could potentially move the burial site and wipe his hands of all accountability if the children were to be found. Of course, they were found, and they were found on his land. Interestingly, David Warwick was almost found in contempt of court when it came to light that he broke a subpoena and watched 45 minutes of his wife's testimony. But Judge Boyce allowed him to testify nonetheless. Benjamin Dean, an FBI intelligence analyst who analysed technical evidence from Chad's house, talked about a Blu-ray disc that had all of the information from Tammy Daybell's phone loaded onto the disc for analysis. One interesting thing that came from the Blu-ray disc was some text messages from Chad Daybell's phone to Tammy Daybell's phone. One of them read from Chad to Tammy, "Well, I've had an interesting morning. I felt I should burn all of the limb debris by the fire pit before it gets too soaked by the coming storms. While I did, I spotted a big raccoon along the fence. I hurried and got my gun, and he was still walking along. I got close enough that one shot did the trick. He is now in our pet cemetery. Fun times." Benjamin Dean, the FBI intelligence analyst, talked about how this was quite a strange interaction because normally The couple exchanged short text messages such as going to the shops, do you need anything from the store? But this one was detailed and long. David Stubbs of the Rexburg, Idaho Police Department detailed how they had received calls about attempted shootings at the houses of Tammy Daybell and Brandon Boudreaux. Although these two seemingly didn't know one another, they'd phoned law enforcement to tell them that a man in some kind of mask had shot at them from inside of a Jeep. The description of the assailant matched both parties, as did the description of the Jeep used. Eventually, police found the Jeep abandoned near a storage unit, which turned out was being rented by Lori Vallow. Without knowledge of everything else happening, but with trying to get to the bottom of the attempted shootings, Stubbs and his team began following Chad, Lori, and Alex Cox due to the Jeep being in Tylee Ryan's name. They collected data on each person, such as Lori and Chad being in a relationship, walking to certain shops like Hobby Lobby and holding hands. And then they received a call asking for them to do a welfare check on Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow, the children of Lori Vallow, the person that they had been following. After Kay Woodcock reached out to various law enforcement agencies inquiring about her grandson. During the welfare check, Stubbs had his body camera on and footage was played for the court. Although the welfare check was unrelated to the Jeep, or so they thought at the time, Stubbs asked Chad Daybell if he had Lori Vallow's number. When Chad Daybell said no, Stubbs thought this was quite strange, but eventually he handed over Lori's number. Eventually, law enforcement caught up with Lori at her apartment, and she began twisting some tale about how her brother was trying to kill her for a $2 million life insurance policy. They asked if it was the brother they saw her with earlier in the day, and she said, no, he's my protector. Stubbs became concerned when Alex Cox didn't make himself known to law enforcement, but that there was movement at the top of the stairs. It soon came to light that Alex Cox had recently purchased 46 guns. And that was really how the week ended, with Stubbs on the stand, who will continue to testify on Monday. But as Nate Eaton said, there are so many pieces to this giant puzzle. And every single time somebody gets on the witness stand to testify, all of the pieces seem to be coming together. Although the defense has not called any witnesses yet, and there is little cross-examination of witnesses on the stand from the defense so far, I wonder if they have something up their sleeve which will unfold over the next few weeks. But that is an overview of week 3. There is so much happening and so many moving parts and so many witnesses. I will bring you an update at the end of week 4 next weekend, but this trial is rapidly going through witnesses. We've seen 6 to 8 witnesses a day some days in this trial, and it's a lot to pack into one short episode of Cult News. But that is the end of today's Cult News. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.